Hello, nonprofit leaders. I'm Sarah Olivieri, your host, and this podcast is here to assist people like you, executive directors, board members, and other nonprofit leaders, make a bigger impact with insights, tips, and lessons learned from nonprofit leaders and experts. Having been an executive director, a board member, and now a consultant and coach, I truly understand the challenges you face. And that's why I'm here. I'm all about working smarter, not harder, so you can make a bigger impact without the burnout. And so is our sponsor, DonorBox. DonorBox isn't just a suite of helpful fundraising tools, it's a partner that helps you raise more money and supports you in retaining your donors. I love their forward-thinking approach. Visit donorbox.org to learn more. And don't forget to sign up for the Inspired Nonprofit Leadership newsletter, where you'll get bite-sized, actionable tips just for nonprofit leaders like you, delivered weekly to your inbox. Sign up at inspirednonprofitleadership.com/sign up. Okay, let's dive into today's episode. My guest for this episode is Lauren Koontz, who is the president and CEO of the YMCA of Metro Atlanta, where she became the first woman to lead the organization in its 165-plus year history. She oversees over 20 branches, 19 early learning centers, over 60 after-school sites, 5 camps, and thousands of staff and volunteers serving Atlanta's communities. She joined the Y in 2012 and previously held leadership roles at the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, Emory University, and more. She's a recognized leader and has been honored as one of Atlanta's most admired CEOs. Welcome, Lauren. Before we dive into your wealth of nonprofit leadership knowledge, could you just share a little bit about yourself personally?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. What a pleasure to be with you and all of the listeners. I'm originally from a small town on the coast of Georgia called St. Simon's Island, about 15,000 full-time residents. My parents still live there. I recently became an empty nester when my youngest went off to college, and my happy place is now going back to where I grew up on St. Simon's with my 2 dogs and hanging out with them on the beach. They love to run in the ocean. In fact, one of my 2 had her leg amputated due to cancer, but she is still out there in the ocean running. So that is when I have a hard day. I imagine that I'm on the beach with my 2 dogs and they're running and having fun.
I love it. I love it. So let's talk about, for those of you listening, in the smaller nonprofit space, women CEOs, women executive directors are clearly the majority. But as we get into looking at larger organizations, it's still very much a male-dominated leadership space. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about coming in as the first woman, what that was like, what your experience brought, and how you went about shaping the future of the YMCA.
Well, when I came to the Y in 2012, I came as the Chief Development Officer. And, the Y, as we rebranded back in about 2010, but it had been the YMCA. And the most traditional path to a CEO seat, no matter what size the Y was to come up through operations. So you would start, at a local branch as a program director, then become, a executive director, potentially a COO, and then move into CEO roles. And so it was really unheard of to not move into the seat that way. But what was recognized is this is a complex organization with lots of different business lines. And so to be a credible candidate really did need to have operational understanding. So back in 2016, I was talking with the then CEO, and he made a comment that he and the 3 CEOs prior to him in this role in Atlanta had all done a YMCA stint in California. And I said, so do I need to go to California? And he couldn't believe that I could be interested in this. And I said, I'm interested in having the experiences and building the skills so that I could be a candidate for consideration. And so he said, well, then it's my job to help you have those. And what ended up happening was our COO at the time retired due to health reasons. And two of us in the C-suite, they literally broke the organization in half. And I kept development, marketing, communications, but also got half of the operations of the organization. And over the next 3 years, really spent a lot of time digging in and trying to understand how this organization works. And so when in 2019, the national search happened, I ended up to be the internal candidate. And I was, really excited to be able to, share what I called in the interview process. I called myself the inevitable candidate, and both the insider and the outsider, because I had come from the outside of the Y. So I brought other experiences and other perspectives, but I knew enough on the inside of the organization that we could hit the ground running with me in seat. So, I think one of the things that's always been really important to me when I share that story is going back to that point in 2016 when I said, I'd like to be considered, and he couldn't believe that I was interested. And I think it's important, if you think you have a path or you're interested in a role, even if you don't have the skill sets that you need at that point or the experiences that you think you'll need, you need to advocate for yourself. You need to put that out there. You need to state that goal and then look for those who can help you along that journey. So I would just say, make sure that you advocate for yourself and that you really think about, if I have a goal of somewhere I'm trying to go, realistically, where am I on that journey in terms of skills and experiences, and where do I need to add to that to be a credible candidate in that search? So that was really how it came about. I stepped into the role in July 2019. I did all of the things that a first-time CEO sometimes does. I was so excited. I was so focused on building our next strategic plan. I wanted to do it all, and I wanted to do it all now. And I really had to learn to pace myself, to calibrate and understand the pace of change in a large organization, and really listening to people. So really had to slow down. I had a mentor tell me, you're moving at a pace right now that if you keep pushing people like this, you're going to turn around behind you and no one's going to be there. And that's a pretty sobering message to hear. And so I really had to, as I got towards the end of 2019, take a deep breath and say, okay, how are we going to craft a vision? How am I going to share it so that everyone sees themselves in that vision? How will we put that into a strategic plan and a roadmap? And how will we prioritize what we want to do? And so we were really well on our way to doing that when COVID hit. And I can tell you a little bit about that experience because it was quite interesting, either now or later on in our conversation. But that really, completely changed the type of leader I had to be in that moment, and really informed where the organization was going. But before I talk about that, I'll circle back to being the first woman in this role. I think a lot of people have talked about it, and it's not that I understate it. It's really humbling to be the first woman in 168 years of this organization. The Atlanta Y is the oldest nonprofit in Atlanta. I like to say that we're a 168-year-old startup because we have to continue to adapt and evolve to be a relevant community organization. We can never rest on what we've done. We've got to listen to our communities and continue to look to the future. Maybe I should have given it more credence. I think I probably was so ready to jump into the role and get started that I didn't give myself at the time back in 2019, and then honestly in 2020 and 2021 with the pandemic and the aftermath and rebuilding, I really didn't have time. But I think it's only now that I'm starting to really understand the significance of being the first woman. And we're the 5th largest Y in the country. And when I look at the top 10 largest Ys, there are 2 women out of those 10. And, I think when I came into the role, the executive team was primarily men, and now it's primarily female. And so, at this point, I have to really, as I'm looking at candidates, go, I need to make sure that I have a balance, because there's so many fabulous women in this organization that I felt deserved an opportunity to sit in that seat and to have their perspectives heard. So, the majority of our staff here at the YMCA of Metro Atlanta, almost 70% are women. So it really isn't unique to have the executive team reflect that staff, but we always have to keep it balanced. I'm really proud of it. And I hope that other people in the organization, especially young women in their journey, see a path for themselves. I do a CEO chat virtually every single month. And one of the things that we always do is lift up an employee that has had 6, 7, 8 different jobs over their course of their Y career, just to show people all the different things you can do and how you don't have to leave the Y to continue to advance your career. And, I think I speak to every single new employee that comes into the organization, and I always tell every single person in there, you should be gunning for my job. I hope when you come in here, you're starting to think about your career path and setting your sights on whatever role that you want. And if that's mine, great. Start thinking about how you get there. So it's, I hope I can be inspirational, but it's, doing this job, quite frankly, based on the impact that we have, is the greatest, most humbling moment in my life.
Yeah, it sounds, I think what you said about being an example, being an inspiration, right? Sure, being a woman in a male dominated space can come with challenges, but I know in my own experience, it is the power of just saying, she can do it, I can do it too, that really speaks to people and makes a big impact. I would love to hear about the leadership lessons and the executive director, CEO lessons you learned. You've come into this new job in July of 2019 and the pandemic comes and you have to exercise or flex a bunch of, I bet, new muscles or muscles you were not expecting
Yes.
to use in that way. So what did you learn from that experience?
So March 10th, 2020, our leadership team is sitting in a conference room and we've been talking about what happens if we need to shut down buildings or what's going to happen. 3 days later, on that Friday, March 13th, our governor shut down all schools. And so we are the largest provider of Head Start in the state of Georgia. Plus we have Georgia Pre-K, some fee for service. So we serve about 3,000 children across 19 early learning center locations. And again, a lot of those kids are living at the poverty level or below. So when schools close, the first thing we start to think about is, oh my goodness, how are those kids going to be fed? And I'm going to come back to that in a second. 3 days later, on the 16th, that Monday, we shut down all of our membership and program-wise that you would think of with a pool and a basketball court. And so in less than a week, we went from business as usual to everything being completely shut down. And, I think we could have felt scared or paralyzed, but we are a nonprofit and we are called to serve. And so the question that we really posed to ourselves in that moment was, what are we uniquely positioned to do to help in this moment? And so we thought of 3 things that we thought were the right things for us to focus on. So the first one was, we have commercial kitchens across our association because of all of those meals that I'm talking about in early learning and after school and summer day camp. We provide those meals. So we started firing up our kitchens and started making meals and letting our families and members know that they could pick up meals in one of our parking lots, basically as a drive-through service. We ended up working together with 67 other organizations around Metro Atlanta. And between March 2020 and December 2020, we served more than 600,000 meals out of one of our parking lots. So that was the first way. The second thing we did was say, we've been in the business of childcare. We're the largest childcare provider in terms of after school and summer in the state of Georgia. So what can we do there? We were able to get representatives from 7 major healthcare systems on a call, which is really amazing given how competitive the healthcare landscape is, and basically said, are you concerned about your employees, whether that's doctors, nurses, EMTs, being able to come into work because they don't have childcare because schools are closed? And they said, yes. And we said, well, we think we can help you with that. So we worked with the state to relicense every one of our Y facilities to become emergency childcare locations. And we opened it up either at no cost or at very low cost to medical professionals, firefighters, police officers. And then extended it to people who worked in grocery stores, warehouses. Basically, if you didn't have the luxury of working from home and you needed childcare, you could come to one of our locations. We did that with masks on, obviously at the time gloves, because we thought gloves were a part of it. We were doing temperature checks. Kids were social distancing with hula hoops. So again, ended up serving during that year about 3,000 children of those working on the front lines of COVID. The last thing we did was we realized that the Y is really a third place for a lot of people. There's so much loneliness and isolation in this country, and especially among seniors. So we pulled a roster of every group of those over 65 at every one of our locations, and we started calling them and asking, were they okay? Could we bring them things? We were literally delivering toilet paper. So it really was about, it doesn't matter what your job was last week. You're now either in childcare, food distribution, or member outreach. And I think as horrible as COVID was, and I'm not making light of it, it was a time where our organization pulled together in a way and had such a singular focus on what we were trying to accomplish. We learned to move an organization that has 100 plus sites. We went from working like a barge to working like a speedboat. And I think that really taught us that we can be agile and that we can adapt and evolve in the moment as communities need it. And that was an important lesson for us because I think we had been moving a little slow and it was time for us to pick up the pace.
Yeah. I love that story because what I heard in that and what I suspect is why you were able to become a speedboat is you followed a very effective process. What I heard you say between the lines was you asked really good strategic questions that led you to good hypotheses about ideas what to do. Then you researched to find out what was really needed. And only after that did you then execute full speed. And so often organizations that I see getting stuck or staying slow, they skip one of those steps. They go straight to assuming they have the answer without asking great strategic questions, or they jump into programming without doing that research piece. And even though you did rapid research, it sounds like you didn't skip it. And I think that's a really, really important piece that I'm hearing of this story of rapid transformation and that you impacted thousands and thousands of lives. So I'd love to hear, you run a very large organization. And I know there are a lot of smaller organizations out there and medium-sized organizations. And I'm forming my question here as I ask it, but I kind of have two questions. I'll hit you with both and then you can figure out which one you want to answer. One is, I think at the end of the day, I hear myself saying like, people are people are people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So running a larger organization is like a divide and conquer. It's the same as running a small organization because people are people are people. On the flip side of that coin, I think there are a lot of things that small organizations see large organizations do from the outside. And they kind of think like, well, they're large, they're successful, we should do that too. But they don't have the filter to think about, what came first? What got them to that point? What's the right activity for my organization, my size? So I'll just leave that as kind of two areas. You can touch on both, one or the other. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, listen, I agree with you. I work with Ys all over the country, and you have Ys that are a $500,000 budget. You have Ys that are 200 million, plus budget. And so, what I always say to other Y CEOs is it's all about scale. We still face the same challenges day to day, right? We're still trying to hire the best employees and retain them. We're still trying to create the best experience for members and program participants. We're still trying to find the right strategic partners. So we have the same challenges and opportunities. It just may be a scale issue. The first thing I think is I'm a big believer in place-based work. So while it may seem that, yes, oh my goodness, we have, all of these different locations and these early learning centers, these after school sites, really, I think about each one as its own entity. And yes, we all work in the same strategic direction and we measure the same things, but I've got to have a level of freedom in the framework to let that local executive director really listen at their community level and understand what that community needs and then bring the right partners together. I always say that sometimes a Y is going to convene, sometimes a Y is going to collaborate, and sometimes a Y is going to lead. And we're not going to be precious about any of those things. We will play the role that we can uniquely play. And sometimes if we're talking about something that's outside of really the core capabilities of what we do, we don't really need to lead in that. But maybe we need to show up because, for instance, if SNAP benefits are a problem, we know a lot of our families in the Head Start space or in some of our after school spaces are going to be deeply impacted by that. So while we might not be leading that charge, we need to be at the table to kind of bring the perspective of what we're seeing on the ground. So I think, it really all about leadership. It has to start at the top, and you have to have a mentality of you want really talented people. You want people who are smarter than you to surround yourself with. And that's not just staff, that's board members. I'm a very selfish CEO. I want board members I can't afford to hire. And I tell them that, like, you're coming to a working board. This is not a name only board. So I want really smart, talented people in leadership roles that we have on staff. And I want smart, talented people in board roles to help advise that. And so I think to the degree that we can continually think about who we are, leading with, but then also who are we partnering with? Because nonprofits are often asked to address the biggest challenges in our communities, whether that's homelessness or hunger, the list goes on. None of us have the resources from a staff or money perspective to solve for those on our own. So we have to come together and think about it around what are we going to do in this community to make that difference and who needs to be at the table. So, I would say even for an organization of our size, resources are a constraint. We have to say no to things. We have to really ask ourselves, does this fall within our current strategic plan? Does it fall within our mission? And, our mission has not fundamentally changed at the Atlanta Y to build healthy mind, body, and spirit for 168 years. You can pack a lot in under healthy mind, body, and spirit. So we really have to be discerning because we don't want to get into, mission creep or scope creep. So I would just say, always think about the people you're surrounding yourself with. Do they understand the vision? Are they going to help move that forward? Are they going to be accountable to that? And the leaders that you bring on as volunteers? And then who are the partners that you're working with to really make your work come to life?
Yeah. I want to ask you, I've heard you talk about partnerships you built in COVID, partnerships that you currently have. But one thing I don't hear a lot of people talk about on this podcast, so I'm going to ask it is, what would you advise, and what are the keys to success in finding the best partners, building great partnerships, and avoiding partnerships that aren't effective?
So I think, again, because of our size, we have a lot of people who think if I can just partner with the Y, I can get my program up and running, right? There's of course, this idea that we've got all these resources. And again, that's just not the case. The more you're asked to do, the more you're asked to stretch, the resources continue to become stretched as well. So the first thing we ask ourselves really is there mission alignment? I mean, do we, as organizations, do we have missions that are similar enough that it makes sense for us to come together? Then we look at our strategic plan and we really ask ourselves, is this partnership going to advance the strategic plan that we've set out for ourselves, not necessarily the strategic plan of the partner? And if it advances ours, then that's great. Then the question becomes, do we have the infrastructure, bandwidth, and resources to actually take this partnership on and do it in a way that's going to be successful, or even pilot something? The last thing I ever want to do is enter into a partnership where we don't have the staff to focus on it or the resources from a financial standpoint to stand it up. That's just going to leave everybody disappointed and somewhat disillusioned. So again, is it mission aligned? Does it drive our strategic plan? And do we have the people and the money to actually make it happen? That's really the lens that we look through for any potential partnership.
Yeah, great lens, really great advice for folks out there. Probably most of you have a mission and a strategic plan, even if it's partially in your head, and a sense of your own resources. I love it. So before we completely run out of time, I hear you've advised other YMCA CEOs, if people want to keep following your work and learning lessons that you have learned along the way, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, I post on LinkedIn like it's my second job. For instance, every summer I visit all of our 22 day camp and resident camp locations, and I document it all through the summer and kind of talk about the different things that I'm seeing. I try to bring the work that we do to life on the ground when I'm out visiting. So please follow me on LinkedIn, Lauren Koontz, YMCA of Metro Atlanta. If you have a specific question, you can always reach out to me directly. My email is Lauren K, that's LAURENK at YMCAAtlanta.org. Always happy to answer any questions you may have.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much. And I'm glad you mentioned LinkedIn. A little personal, public service announcement I have to CEOs out there is use LinkedIn. I still feel like nonprofit CEOs are kind of lagging here, but there's a great community. There's lots of support. It's a great way to network. It's a great way to find board members. So follow Lauren on LinkedIn and make a practice of having a presence there yourself. Well, thank you so much, Lauren, and thank you out there for listening and everything you do to make our communities better. I have a quick favor to ask of you out there listening. If you take a moment to like and leave a review on this podcast, wherever you're listening to it, it helps promote the algorithm and share this resource to other nonprofit executive directors and CEOs like yourself. Or additionally, if you'd like to share it with a friend or colleague who could benefit from this episode or another episode, spreading good knowledge, tips, and inspiration is what we're all about. Until next time, all the best.
You've been listening to Inspired Nonprofit Leadership. Thanks so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode or the bonus episodes. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review and be sure to share with your friends and colleagues. Tune in every week for more useful insights and wisdom on nonprofit leadership. Thanks so much for all you do for the communities you serve. Until next time, all the best.